Thank you all very much for coming here this afternoon to the Thieves Kitchen in Worthing for our first episode of After Dusk. I'm Fabrice Barsley from Worthing's Voice, and I'll be hosting today along with James Pearson, who is also working with us at Worthing's Voice.
Yeah, thanks Joe. It's nice to see everybody here.
Okay.
I'm Darius Asasi, father of 3 ex-commercial airline pilots, engineer, anti-fracker, very concerned for our environment and the well-being.
Hi there, my name's Jan Warrington. I met some of you at the Balkan protest site. I used to work for Southern Water in the water quality testing labs, and later was a police officer serving in the counter-terrorist wing at Gatwick. Very pleased to be here, just trying to do some good.
My name is Mike Mendoza. I'm a district councillor for Angel District Council. Work for TalkSport, LBC. My background is obviously radio and television. Sky TV. Currently a presenter of the latest television in Brighton.
I'm Bob Smitherman. I'm a councillor, a county councillor in West Sussex. I was Mayor of Worthing up until June. I'm now Worthing's town crier, and I like to think of myself as Mr. Worthing. And I'm passionate about the town and making a huge difference for our community.
And I'm Martin Beard, Dark City radio host, also Mass Action Demand radio host, geoengineering activist, and IT support analyst as well, senior IT support analyst as well.
Thank you. And today we're here to discuss secrecy, in particular government secrecy, and we'll be covering such subjects as D-notices, which are notices put out by the government to make sure that stories don't get published in the media. We'll also be discussing pink papers, which some of you may know about, which are official papers which aren't put into the public domain. Such things as undercover policing, which has been in the news recently, with new guidelines for undercover police officers to be brought in. False media stories, secret organisations and hidden reports, and electronic wiretapping, which has recently been in the news courtesy of Edward Snowden, who's made a number of revelations about how intrusive the spying network is in this country. We've recently had a Snoopers charter, which was turned down initially in the government vote, and has recently been reenacted as the DRIP, the Data Retention and Investigatory Powers Act, which gives GCHQ a large amount of power to look at our emails, telephone calls, and who we're making them to. And with that recently going before Parliament, do we think that the intelligence services or the police services or even local councils have too much power, or not enough power, or about the right amount of power to intrude into people's lives and to keep their operations secret?
And what place does government secrecy have in the mechanics of working democracy?
Do we think that the Snoopers Charter originally was very widely debated in the press and in the media, and it wasn't approved? Recently, last week, we had the DRIP Act put through, and it was put through at an incredibly quick speed. And I know a number of people are quite concerned about that level of debate between the legislators and the people that they're legislating on behalf of. And I just thought, do we think that's enough time to enable a debate to happen? What do you think, Mike?
You mentioned local authorities to start off with. I don't think local authorities really have any power or any teeth at all, but maybe people have kind of a false illusion over that. I know with our own authority, we go to nowhere. Just change the topic slightly. Look at travellers. We can't move travellers without doing certain things to them, without carrying out certain audits. You know, we can't just pick them up and somebody go. As far as the bill is concerned, we're talking about, everything has to take time to go through. Maybe they have rushed it through, maybe it is wrong.
And do you think that with things such as travellers, as you mentioned, you don't think the councils have enough power to engage with them?
No. Nor the police. The police. No, you have a section 61 notice which can be put on them, which does move them, but you have to go through an awful lot of hoops to jump through before you can actually do it.
And do you feel some of those hoops are unnecessary, or
no, I don't think so. I think you're going to jump over it, but I don't think they've got the right to something down on other people's land and public parks at all. Just land there and just move. I think they should move on fairly quickly, and we just can't do that.
Okay.
I just wouldn't trust a government authority to be snooping. I don't really know the defined detail as you do, but I wouldn't trust the government as far as I could throw them. Absolutely. I found out that GCHQ sprayed residents of Norfolk with cadmium in the 60s. It's declassified as a little test, and people are dying from it still. You just type it up, it's all there, you know, and do a search. I wouldn't trust them to be snooping on any conversations, communications of any sort, no.
I think the question is, considering that the bill has been rushed through at a certain juncture of time, why has it been rushed? I think that, that
deeply suspicious.
Points the finger very suspiciously that way.
As far as the government states, is that they have a heightened security threat, which has been there since the beginning of this year, and they feel that they need that type of legislation in there.
A security threat from their makings by meddling in other parts of the world. So war perpetuation, the military-industrial complex. You know, a lot of people get rich off of wars with reconstruction contracts. I'm deeply cynical.
Well, we may well come to some of those issues later.
So who are they snooping on? Do we know who they're snooping on?
Well, they've over 2 million people who use Yahoo software to communicate using their computers had all their data held and kept in storage. And when that was revealed that actually 10% of those involve intimate exchanges, so obviously very, very personal. And for example, some members of the public, if they're having their telephone calls recorded, some people engage with their counsellors, engage with medical support and psychological support using those methods. And it seems like a very, very broad net that's been cast.
That's only what we're being told about.
Yeah.
When it comes months after the gagging laws and the erosion of our rights and freedoms, why would they be spying us? It's all well curious.
I don't think any terrorists have ever been caught from intercepted communications either, ever.
That's interesting.
That's what I've heard.
Because there has been quite a lot of conversation on intercepted communications and exactly how and why they use them. One of the more recent ones was GCHQ's ability to increase the hits of a YouTube video or decrease the hits of a YouTube video, and other sites that have that kind of media. And also, one that I found incredibly interesting was online polls. GCHQ now have the ability to manipulate online canvassing.
For public interest, are they doing that?
Well, this is anathema, because the intelligence services claim to operate in the public interest, and yet they also have security considerations, and how these are balanced out and how they're presented to the public is not always the most transparent thing, which of course is not always possible with security agencies or with the police, as you may well know. And it's part of that oversight, and I suppose to move away from the intelligence agencies towards the police. There was a case of Mark Kennedy, or Mark Stone, who was a undercover police officer who was able to engage in relationships with peaceful activists, people who are protesting on the roads. Is that acceptable to have that level of, and is that necessary? Do you think that the police need those kind of powers to be able to, the sorts of things that we associate with organised crime?
Well, what's the justification for such a level of scrutiny of people who are peaceful protesters who've made no actual claim to being violent or causing acts of terrorism? They're just basically stating a position and are willing to peacefully protest on that position. Now, I don't see how that. I can't see any justification for undercover observation of those people or infiltration of their ranks.
I think that's a really valid point. I think my position would be is actually if they can prove the intelligence is there to justify that action, then fair enough. But actually, that's not what's happening. One of the things that worries me with the so-called Snoopers Charter, it was basically kicked out because it was an appalling piece of legislation. That basically the three political parties' main people went off into a room, come up with some sort of intelligence, allegedly, and then they've all gone back to their respective parties and said we need to rush this through Parliament. Well, actually, Parliament has a very, very long process for things to become law, and rightly so, to enable it to be properly scrutinised, through both the elected representatives and the House of Lords. We can maybe cover the House of Lords another day, but that is a very, very bureaucratic process, rightly so, because actually it's about legislating for laws of the land. And then all of a sudden, when it suits, government, they can go together in a huddle, and it's not surprising that the public are cynical because we're 12 months away from an election. The three political parties have gone into a huddle, agreed, to rush through this so-called Snoopers Charter without any sort of scrutiny whatsoever.
And the people aren't having their representation put forward.
Yes.
It's the thoughts of a few.
That's right. There's 650 odd MPs, all of them who are basically being whipped to actually support the three political parties in this country, and that cannot be right when you're dealing with scrutiny legislation. I'm very involved in another capacity with the leasehold sector. Hugely complicated pieces of legislation. Terrible legislation that came in 2002, never been fully enacted. But to actually try and get something like that scrutinised never ever gets parliamentary time. And yet something like this, literally bypasses the whole parliamentary
You have
process.
to question whose interest those decisions are being made for. Are they for the people's interest or corporate interests?
Exactly, I think that's what it's like. Yeah. And
It's obvious, isn't it?
What is also terrifying is when you think about the people who are making these decisions who are actually only making these decisions on a very slender mandate. It's not very clear who should be in charge here.
And also what oversight is available with the undercover police officers. They were forming relationships with people that they were monitoring. They even had children with people who they were engaged with, and the oversight seemed incredibly poor. Now that's something which is being examined and being inquired on now. So hopefully there will be some change with that in the future. But if legislation is being rushed through, as Bob said, very, very quickly, then how can we be sure that that inquiry is really getting to the hub of the matter? And as Jan mentioned, in whose interests? I was very surprised that not only do MPs, recently it came out that MPs aren't CRB checked, and they can often deal with vulnerable people in situations where they may be quite desperate, and if people usually work with vulnerable people, they're usually CRB checked. And I found that quite interesting. And I don't know if in just a moment or two, Martin, you might like to tell us a little bit about what you discovered about CRB Checks after the break.
We are proud to announce #OP Safe Winter. In this age of consumerism, there is very little love or care about each other. We're here to change that. No longer shall we stand by and watch isolation and fear be spread by the establishment, which is killing and destroying community and lives. We all have a voice, so make yours heard. You are the power, your choice, your life, you are the motivation for justice. Mission of the OP: to highlight the homeless situation in areas throughout world. Build up a resource network for food supply, blankets, clothes, socks, etc. that can be donated. Amenities for warm showers, etc. First mission: please list the current homeless count in alphabetical order by town, city, country. Within each town, contact local charities, shops, businesses that will support with any of the above list and more. You can get the latest figures from your local council by sending them a Freedom of Information request if you are not sure of the figures in your town. Second mission: coordinate with unions and others willing to participate in the execution, distribution of services we are able to provide. Whether it's transport, collection of donations, etc. This is not definitive. Any other suggestions, ideas are welcome. Please list at the bottom of the pad as bullet points to make it easy to follow. Let's make winter as safe and comfortable for as many people within our reach and beyond. Please share this op with as many people as possible. Work together online or RL. Everyone can help, no matter how small or big the activity. Join us on IRC, Twitter, @OPSafeWinter. We are anonymous. We are Legion. We do not forgive. We do not forget. Expect us. We are the voice of the voiceless.
Who's in it? The ICE taxi driver. I'm going to go out. I'm going to expose. I'm going to look into the bribery, into the corruption, into the cover-ups, into the lobbyists, into the relationships between the elected officials and corporations and bankers. Who rules us? Who's in charge?
And if you'd like to pick up what you discovered about...
I was having a chat with a friend of mine, or a contact I made called Pete, and he's what they call a targeted individual. You know, that's bad enough alone, but what he's discovered about West Mercia Police is that there are a large amount of police officers there that are not being CRB checked, that have criminal records. This goes down from, when we don't know what exactly these officers have done, but the information was put out there by a local newspaper as well, so there are people still investigating it. The question that we should be raised by this is, when you have someone of such trust as a police officer, and this is strong stuff, that why would the force, for example West Mercia, allow these people to access and to be part of the police force, and then, as most police officers are, they do invariably involve with vulnerable people. They shouldn't be allowed, and this is incredibly worrying stuff. I don't know if anybody else has ever heard of anything like this before, because this is pretty kind of explosive, and this gentleman in question has the evidence to back this up as well.
Yeah. We saw from the Freedom of Information request where we specifically asked, do people who have not had criminal records checks or do have a criminal record, do they work with vulnerable people? And the reply was yes. And when you put that into context with who are these people working for, whose interests do they represent, when in undercover operations, for example, if you put an undercover operative involved in a situation, if they have a history of criminality, who's to say that they, with no oversight, that they may overstep the bounds, which potentially has happened in the past.
And this isn't to say that that this is not all of the police. There's select people. Now this could well be, and obviously this will be found out. The dirt will come out on this, and I would personally imagine it's going to be. And it is looking already at the moment that it's higher up officers, not the lower down ones. This has been going for quite a while, so it's really is a kind of a case of watch this space. A lot of this information can be found on the internet. I mean, going back to the drips thing, for example, how long that lasts, I don't know because that might, this might well be covered up. But whilst we've got the information, we're going to do what we can to get that out there.
33 of the 43 police forces have been responsive in saying whether they have officers who haven't been CRB checked, and also what some of the offences are. And some of them are violent offences, some of them are death by reckless driving, so on and so forth. And obviously people can serve their time, be rehabilitated, and it's just the transparency within that system. Obviously for people who work with vulnerable people, they do have to be CRB checked. And I was very surprised that PCSOs or police officers who are in a responsible position aren't necessarily CRB checked. And I don't know if anybody else finds that kind of worry.
It's disturbing. If teachers have to be CRB checked, then everyone should be. And you will get people who are drawn to positions where you can have power over people automatically, just from your position of employment. You're going to get some Rollins who gravitate to that job just to have their will over people and throw people around maybe and hide behind a uniform.
I mean, I think you've seen recently on some of the fracking sites, some really some manifestations of really unsavoury behaviours amongst the police. You've seen examples of what I would say disturbed behaviour. People who are obviously finding gratification from being violent and actually overstepping the lines that civil society accept as being this is the way we deal with a conflict. I don't know if you saw the photo of the police officer who obviously was getting some sort of pleasure, and
he was tweeting about it after he finished work, how he'd enjoyed his day and what he'd been doing.
He looked orgasmic, didn't he?
Oh yes.
And I wonder if you were to go back into his past and record, if there was anything that we, as the public, should know about.
Yeah, I agree.
Because wasn't he bragging about punching people?
Very much so.
Knocking people's teeth
so
out?
many. I've got the most amount of arrests, and I've managed to
There's a liability to that particular police force.
Absolutely.
Well, it'll cost them money. You'll get found out and cost them money.
Absolutely. It was all videoed, it was all live streamed, so when it does end up in court.
And there's a victim on the end of his boot and fist.
Very much so. Something else I'd like to add to what you said about a lot of the squabbling that's going on with some of the protectors, that the majority of the ones that I've met and spent time with, without a doubt, they're all suffering terribly with post-traumatic stress disorder, which in itself is a trigger for angry behaviour. They'll kick off at the start, first thing. These guys could do with some proper supporting help, calming the situation down.
I was kettled at Vulcan, and it's the first time I've been kettled. Oh my lord! No wonder you get trouble in that situation. Rammed in really tight. There was a father with a 3-year-old on his shoulders. It wasn't being allowed out, and the pressure just got unbearable. We didn't want it. It was forced upon us. It was outrageous. Absolutely outrageous.
We had perfect examples of this a few years ago, and you had the ban live exports in Sussex. And then the police behaviour then, when they were tweeting and putting stuff on Facebook and whatever then, of their behaviour, and they're very proud of bashing people's heads in. That comes from the Metropolitan Police. They come down, let's bash a few heads in Sussex.
It's like a mental illness to do with ego and things like that. And I think a lot of them probably don't even realise what the word ego means.
And the same thing with the kettling. I think that started in London again. There was a demonstration, I think, in Piccadilly Circus or something. The police decided on doing that. And just kept people there, kids, women with children.
A couple of years ago.
And some of the, I mean, it happens at football sometimes as well. More trouble at football, in my mind, is created by the police than some of the fans at times. They're asking for trouble when they go in there. They surround people in the stands. They're intimidating to the fans, and that's when it just goes on.
And they're supposed to be public servants, protecting peace and property.
Who do they?
And people.
Do you think, in your experience, having seen police and film police, and I've often found that when the public film police officers, that their behaviour is of a different standard. And in America, where they've been trialling body-worn cameras, where the police officers have to keep the camera on, that it's not at their discretion as and when they can turn it off. The incidences of violence involving the public and police was down to over 60%, and complaints against the police dropped by 90%.
Smart move.
Or very close to. And do you think that this could be a way forward in terms of getting more accountability for the police?
Absolutely, I think it's an absolute no-brainer.
Yeah.
You know that sort of evidence is quite overwhelming, isn't it?
And you'll find the bad eggs in the basket.
Absolutely.
Because the overwhelming majority of police are good people trying to do the right thing, but a few bad eggs.
Yeah, and you would have thought those good, law-abiding, decent police officers that you know from the sort of the sort of ill police, like I said, background, all the rest of it, actually they would welcome it.
Yeah,
exactly. What does this stop us? We've seen time and again happen. When the police are held to account for some wrongdoing that they've done, the amount of times that they just close ranks and it just goes away. What's to stop that happening with their own footage?
I think another thing as well is that if that was to be implemented in this country, then we would definitely need a body that would give us transparency of that data. That data would need to be at least by a public body that can be verified.
Stronger than the IPCC.
Yeah, definitely.
And not the Press Complaints Commission, of course.
It's a step in the right direction, that sounds like, if we get out of here. It's got to be.
Well, I think that there's most forces have actually budgeted for body-worn cameras. Most forces are also looking towards having it at the officer's discretion. Where they've been trialled so far here, they have been at the officer's discretion, which doesn't always help the transparency or get the accountability. And obviously there are some situations, when people are bereaved, if there's dealing with children and vulnerable people, where it's not necessarily appropriate to film an interaction, but most interactions on the street in public, there's no reason to not have that option open and available to people. Exactly how that's presented to the public and given transparency and access to them, maybe we can discuss after the break.
See, Celts believed that Samhain or Halloween, the veil between the living and the dead was dropped for just that day, and the spirits of the living could intermingle with the spirits of the dead. All the year's dead would be celebrated, and in hopes of guiding the spirits and loved ones to their resting places, large bonfires would be lit to draw the spirits and show them the path safely to the other side.
Something which has come about over the last year or so is Simon Damchuk, MP's book into Cyril Smith, and the number of files from people complaining, from police and other protective public service bodies not following through and being held accountable for. In fact, I think before he was an MP, and I think prior to him being a councillor, there were files that had disappeared from 1970, and that's an awful long time to have people's complaints literally be disappeared. And for somebody in a position that Cyril Smith went from 1970 through to 1980, he became a very, very powerful establishment figure, cabinet member, and obviously he was at that time guilty of some very obscene crimes involving taking power over people using his dominant position. A little bit like you were saying earlier, some people seem to need to be in a position of power and control over
like
others.
a mental illness.
Well, they're attracted to it, aren't they?
There's something wrong with them, but they haven't maybe matured into normal, well-balanced human beings. Maybe they were damaged themselves as a youngster, and the wound and the scar from it just is there, and they haven't really gotten to grips with it.
And I think that's something which is hopefully changing as mental health service, as hopefully police protection teams are much more open to engaging with the victims of those crimes, and hopefully people are able to get more help as people pay attention to that.
It's a sign of times though. I mean, years ago people wouldn't listen to kids complaining, people wouldn't listen to women even about. Now we've moved on from that. And now people are listening, people are investigating.
I've got a theory about it as well, which is bang on subject, but off to a tangent. That you get certain people in life who just can't help themselves but to destroy things. And what if you destroy the life of a human being by abusing them? Yeah. Well, maybe there's some kind of like dark, occult kind of groups of people who actually engage in this sort of thing willingly, knowingly, because they get some kind of kick, some pleasure out of the abusing and the destruction of that person's life and the harm and the pain they're causing them. They're the opposite to a good person, like light and dark.
Yeah, when you look at some of the rituals that are associated with aristocracy and throughout the history, some of the levels of depravity that you find in, say, Roman Euro times, it's no surprise to me at all that we start hearing from people, and it seems to be predominantly working class kids, that they're being treated in such a manner by very wealthy, very privileged people. It seems to be a lever of, you bang on, a lever of control.
There's some really fascinating research available through the computer. It's never through the TV, it's always through the computer. People have spent their lives researching these subjects. And I've got to say, when you start watching it, it makes a lot of sense.
Did any of you fellows catch, and I cannot remember the Lord's name, the peer's name, but he was a chief Tory whip. And essentially he came out on Newsnight, and I can't remember how many years back, but I think it's to the nation's shame that man was not held to account. When he came out and said as a whip, he was approached by certain MPs or people involved in the Conservative Party that had drug problems, had gambling problems, and also if they had been caught with a young boy. This was on national TV, and how could this have gone under the radar?
Anyone with any sense who was in trouble would come to the whips and tell them the truth and say, no, I'm in a jam, can you help? It might be debt, it might be scandal involving small boys, or any kind of scandal which a member seemed likely to be mixed up in. They'd come and ask if we could help. And if we could, we did. And we would do everything we can, because we would store up brownie points. That sounds a pretty nasty reason, but it's one of the reasons. Is if we can get a chap out of trouble, then he'll do as we ask forevermore.
Yes, that was the chief whip to Edward Heath's government from 1970 to 1973, and that illustrates part of the point. Is you can have very powerful, prominent people, and when people complain against them, and they're not heard, and what's more, the records are destroyed, and that's not an easy thing to do, to make these records disappear. And with somebody of the capability of Cyril Smith, many people in the public are now questioning whether their MPs. And there are many different ways a Member of Parliament can have leverage over. There was a dispatches programme recently that showed some nations have friends of the Conservative Party and friends of the Labour Party, and through those people who organise those, they invest £100,000, and it's illegal to, or it's illegal not to declare a gift over £10,000 to an MP. So what Mr. Zabludovic was doing in the dispatches programme is he was dividing it between 10 members of the group. They would take a percentage of 2 or 5% and pass on the rest to who they were supporting. Some would be to their campaign funds, some could be their private funds, some could even be offshore. It's not illegal.
So he found a way around the system. Like
The donations are all under 10,000, but if you have 10 of them, that's £95,000.
And it's one of the things that I find really frustrating. Obviously my political party's in coalition. One of the things that was a key plank of the coalition was we were going to deal with this. Big money politics. The electoral system. Like where chief whips have got so much power over their MPs. Because if they find out that one of their MPs, who perhaps their first time in Parliament, they've got ambitions to go up the chain, be a minister and so on. Actually, if that chief whip, actually finds out something about them, they can use it against them to make sure they vote the way they always want to vote all the time. And I think that's really what worries straight affairs, really.
And this is like one of the questions that has to be asked about the mechanics of Parliament and the mechanics of modern day politics. Are they can they coexist with the mechanics of operational democracy? Because, to my mind, shouldn't your local MP be answerable to the local people, not to a chief whip of a party?
Yeah.
But under the current electoral system, I totally agree with you, but the current electoral system, take Worthing where we are now, barring some sort of amazing clap of thunder, we're going to end up in Worthing with 2 Conservative MPs. Now, you can argue what you like about the individuals concerned, but actually the reality is Worthing is one of the safest Conservative seats in the country. To Tim Lawton before he stood for East Worthing Shoreham was then stood for Parliament in Sheffield Brightside. He was never going to beat David Blunkett in Sheffield Brightside, but actually he did his time and ends up as given a seat in East Worthing Shoreham, which frankly, he's always going to win if he wears a blue rosette. If we really want to engage people in democracy, actually we somehow got to make every single person's vote count.
I don't think we have democracy in this country.
No.
From what I've found out, we're actually under corporate fascism, where the government is making decisions for easements and favour to large corporate interests over the interests of the people. GM food and things.
But it may not necessarily be corporate interests, and this is the point that I'm making, is that you can have corporations sponsor MPs just through the mechanism I said in terms of donating. You can also have
lobbying.
nation
Is that
states.
lobbying?
Yes, lobbying.
Which is just bribery, isn't it?
Well,
At the end of the day.
you can also have nation states doing that. So, for example, if you have a Member of Parliament who say earns £100,000 in a year, if they're also receiving £100,000 from a lobbyist, the question could be asked by the member of the public: who is that person working for? Are they working half the time for me?
He should be in jail. What's he doing in a position of political power, beg your pardon, and he's taking money to have his decisions swayed? Come on.
Let's catch your questions. That's been more for you.
Yeah, and by the same token, as much as we are currently discussing transparency and basically demanding transparency from our politicians, I think in the case of guys like Prince William and Prince Andrew who are going across overseas making deals on our behalf, I want complete and utter transparency from them as well. I think that is a vital component. And when you're talking about government working on the behalf of corporations and such, I also want to know what agendas are being fostered and being spread, and what manipulations there are out there in the world by old bloodlines and families, you know, because there are a number of very rich families who seem to have more than...
Quickly going back to the first talking point, where deals are done in very quickly, you know, and who's interested. The transatlantic partnership or something, where, and this is all being done behind closed doors, whereby a large multinational corporation can sue a nation for loss of earnings. Who is going to end up paying when they win their court case, suing the country? It's you and me are going to end up paying that, not the government of the country. So, is that not just so wrong?
Well, the banking crisis proved your point.
Absolutely. You know, banks completely wrecked the economy, and because of how important banking was, actually, you know, you and me, us collectively as taxpayers, had to step in and bail everyone out. And yet, actually, what they were doing, they were playing Russian roulette with our country, you know, as casino bankers.
I've got an email saying that Bayer are currently suing the European Union for loss of earnings because we, the people, protested against the neonicotinoid pesticides, which are apparently knocking the bee populations back. By, you know, independent scientific studies are conclusive on that point. So now Bayer are suing for loss of earnings, the European Union. Come on, is this some sort of twilight zone we're living in? This ain't right.
It's very interesting to see the dynamics between corporation and government, and how the people are not necessarily represented or have their interests looked after. And hopefully we can discuss a little bit more of that after the break.
Well, it's like this, kid.
Children grow up in a culture and they're told that this is how society runs. We got a bunch of people at the top, they have all the guns in the world and they tell us what to do, but we praise them and we think that they're great. And we have a government that takes half of our property in order to protect us from people who might take our property. This twisted, monstrous, hellacious, Sauron-infested edifice called culture. At the logical riddles we have infested this world with and the degree to which they wrap around and strangle the neck of humanity, we have the government who can grab us, kidnap us, throw in the back of a windowless van, throw us in jail, because we're afraid of people who might use violence against us. And we believe in sky ghosts that nobody has ever seen, which is one of the 10,000 ghosts that the world believes in as a whole. But the other 9,999 are completely ridiculous, and we laugh at them, those funny Hindu goddesses with the 8 arms. We instead worship this hippie-looking guy who walks on water and comes back from the dead. That's totally sensible. All the other religions are really crazy, but this one is really, really sensible. Oh, and now you have to go to school. You're in a natural state of curiosity. You learned how to crawl, how to roll over, how to walk, how to talk, how to read, and how to do math and all of that. You did that just as part of your daily activity. You have a hunger for knowledge. You ask why all the time, and you really want to know what's going on. But now we have to harness that natural curiosity, joy, creativity, and exploration of the world, this hunger, this thirst, this drive to know, and we have to seal it up in a bunch of little rows in dusty desks with some ancient teacher up there squeaking away and yelling at you if you put a foot wrong. This is what we call a healthy society. Yeah, we've got huge amounts of the population in jail. I'm sorry about this. We have used you. We have used your flesh, blood, curiosity, brains, intelligence, and creativity as collateral to borrow from all the bankers in the world against you. So sorry, we have sold you into slavery before you were even born. We still have wars, we have drug addiction, promiscuity, we have a divorce rate of 50%, we have public sectors that are completely out of control. All of this is our society, but it's so healthy and so great and so wonderful. By God, if you deviate from this society, you are wrong. And you must conform to this society. People club the kids with culture. Emphasis on the first syllable of that. There is a cult in culture. That's an insane kind of arrogance. The beginning of wisdom is always humility. It is always a statement, I don't know. And anybody who can look at the society that we have, the recessions, inflation, housing crashes, unemployment of 22%, endless wars, anybody who can look at that society and say that this society has the right to force children to conform to that society because it is just so right and just and healthy is so sick that you can't even speak a language called health with that person. It will probably make their head explode.